unique it is. And one of the interesting things was I used to be what I would consider shy, right? But there were certain things at MCI where they'd engage the students, like Manson essays and things like that. Well, I remember I was taking Rosalie Williams in English, and I was a Manson essayist, and no way, not going to do it. Not getting up and speaking in front of anybody. Don't want to, you can't get me to do it. So that kind of spurred me on to somewhat stay involved and go out beyond, normal interest. And the MCI environment, and plus the location of Pittsfield, I'm an aerospace engineer, and it's like, how do you get into aerospace when you're in the middle of Maine? Well, that little airport in that little tiny town, I would always see planes flying over. And if you guys remember, Chuck Chinquette used to have some antique airplanes, right? And they would fly over and do mock dog fighting. Well, as a kid growing up, that was a science program at MCI. So it got me moving into that science type field, and I stuck with it. And yeah, it's a great environment.
That's interesting, Pat. And interestingly, there are some of the summer programs we use the airport, and we do some simulation stuff down at a simulator down in, I think it's Lewiston, maybe it's Augusta, so there's some interesting connections there. Yep. Thanks, Pat. Bradley, how about you? You and I were walking around some of the science labs there a couple of months ago when you were in town, and you were starting to recall some of your time there at MCI. What got you stimulated, or maybe the opposite, that sort of got you thinking about some further things beyond MCI?
I guess I'd have to say, my family, my dad was an engineer by training, and I have three brothers who are civil engineers. I thought I'd be an engineer, actually, in some form, probably a civil engineer, because building is in our blood. I always liked science. I always liked the science classes we had coming up through Vickery and Warsaw and MCI. And I never really settled on chemistry until probably our junior year when we took chemistry. I think it was our junior year. And it just really, some of the things we did in lab, as simple as they were, in the grand scheme of things, just got me inspired to, I really like this and I understand it. And I think that's what gave me the impetus to, go to college and study chemistry. I also was thinking about the medical field as well, in terms of, maybe med school or something related to that. But when I did chemistry, I really enjoyed it, and I got into organic chemistry, and that sort of that got me to where I am today, because I do organic chemistry as a living, medicinal chemistry, really.
Well, and you're in a lab every day. I've heard you say, I love going to the lab, even to
I do. I love being in the lab. I do drug design. I can design it on a computer and then take that idea and go in the lab and make it. And then we have all these different tests that we submit the compound to. And so it's gratifying, to see, oh, this worked, or even if it didn't work, it's an answer to what we need to go where we need to go. That's really the fun part for me, is actually the compound design, and then go in the lab and make it and see how it works against all these different targets that we have.
Interesting. That's very interesting. We'll get back to that some more, Brad. Thank you. Lydia, how about yourself? What you and I had an interesting conversation about. You're in informatics, and you started out in political science or something.
Yes. So I had a little backwards way of getting into science. While I was in high school, I really focused more on the humanities classes, history and English. But I will say one of the things that MCI was amazing about was all the extracurriculars that you could get involved with. So student council, right? I was really involved with student council, with some sports teams, and band and jazz band. And I feel like getting involved with all those different things helped make me, ultimately successful in my career. And so I originally thought I was going to be a lawyer. So I was really into student council, and I went to college for political science. And on day one, I sat through my first political science class and looked at the syllabus and was like, absolutely not. I cannot do this for the entire 4 years. So I decided to change my major to psychology. My older sister was actually a psychology major and was still a lawyer. So I still thought maybe that would be my track. But when I was in psychology, I was really interested in the neuroscience and the physiology and that kind of, and I actually, like Brad, really enjoyed my chemistry class as a junior. I didn't really think much of it because I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer, so I don't really need chemistry, but I did really enjoy it. And so had a little bit of a backwards way of getting there, but ultimately found my way into the science world.
Interesting. And again, we're going to hear more about that. Jess, what, you're with students every day. Are any of these conversations or any of these initial points that these folks are making sort of about the changes and the twists and turns in their history? Do you see any of that with students in MCI that maybe don't know where they're going?
I think that happens all the time. We have kids that, they'll take a class or think they're interested in something, and then very early on, sometimes later on, but sometimes pretty early, realize maybe that's not quite what I want to do. When you actually get into it in a deeper level at college, can give you a little bit different perspective as to what that entails than what you maybe thought it did. So, I've seen multiple times kids going into, I'm going to go into biomedical, and then they take one class in psych and they change. And it's, kind of the exposure, what they see, where they see it going. And we're trying to work more. I think you mentioned the pathways stuff earlier. We've been looking at trying to introduce kids more moving forward to job careers, specifically in those areas they might be interested in, so they can have some exposure to them before they maybe decide, I'm going to start going to college for this, to have some experience with it and see if it's actually a field that they're really interested in going to. With that said, I don't think it costs money to start down a path and then realize a year or two in that that's not what you want to do, but there's some good learning from that as well.
I'm going to, I didn't say this before, but just for everybody who's on the session, we are going to open this up for questions in a little bit here. So be thinking about what you might want to ask some of these folks, those of you who are participating as attendees, and we'd love to hear your perspective. I was going to ask this question later, but since you brought it up, Jess, I've been thinking about this for a while. And I think, Pat, maybe we'll start with you again. There's a lot of talk, especially in the tech world. I'm in technology, and I've hired people over the years that did not have college educations because they had specialized programming skills or specialized technology experience or knowledge. And so it definitely was the case where I could and occasionally would hire people without a college education. Is that a possibility in your world, Pat, where somebody could come in without a college education?
Yeah, actually, and there's a couple avenues. A prior chief engineer, he was a chief engineer when I started working it was Goodrich before it was United Technologies, before it was Collins, before it was Raytheon. So he was a chief engineer, and he actually was not a degreed engineer. He just had a lot of experience in the site I'm at. We make evacuation slides for aircraft. So the large inflatables that shoot out of the doors and people slide down out of flaming aircraft. You probably just saw something on the news in Japan where there's still today. We use we're in a very manual production facility, and actually in all the suppliers that we deal with, we are actually running into challenges where, with all the CNC machining going on and advanced machining, that doesn't necessarily need an advanced degree, a college degree, but it does need some technical understanding. And there are actually vocational type degrees and programs of study that students can get into and start going into those CNC programming and machining type fields. And I work with a lot of my technicians. Not one of them is college degreed, but they have very good skills, working skills with their hands, and they have an understanding of how to take a very large piece of inflated fabric and fold it down into a very small package and then define that package. They know how to document that so it's repeatable. And then we can make these things repeatable on aircraft and prove to the FAA that even though this is a very manually made product, that it still will work in all these.
We lost a little bit of that, Pat, but I think we got most of it. And I'm not necessarily, I'm not encouraging one or the other. I'm just asking about your perspective on it because it's a topic, right? It's a big topic.
Yeah.
And the trick is, how do you get in? Lydia, in your world, I would think it might be harder to get that first step in without a college degree. Would you say that?
Yes, typically you do need a college degree. However, it doesn't necessarily have to be in a science field. There's a lot of opportunities to learn on the job. And you can also, we've had a lot of people in our, at least my current team supports this, where they're working, but they're also going to school on the side. And so they're able to have flexible hours and continue going to pursue a degree that's more in the field that we do. So they're getting some exposure at work, but then they're also taking classes. And so I think there's a lot of support. And I think everyone understands that when you're, typically 18 and going to college, you don't necessarily know what you want to do. Yep. And so your degree might not reflect when you graduate the job that you necessarily get. But I think there's a lot of on-the-job training. And I know Dana-Farber also has like an embedded university where you can take classes hosted by Dana-Farber at the same time.
Did you know about those things when you took your job? Were you kind of looking for that kind of organization?
I did not know.
Turned out to be the case.
No, yeah, I did not know. And that was something really, they have Excel classes and they also support LinkedIn Learning. And so you can take classes through LinkedIn and, Dana-Farber will pay for it. But no, I was not aware about that. So that was kind of a nice bonus.
Interesting. Yep. And I want to circle back to you as well, because what you do is really interesting too. You're in a science setting, but you're not necessarily doing science. So we'll come back to that in a minute. And Brad, I would think it'd be almost impossible in a laboratory like yours for somebody to come in without a college education and maybe even an advanced degree. Is that a true statement, or is it changing?
Today it's like I've been through hiring process quite a bit through this current company and previous companies, and we will not look at anyone without a college degree. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't happen. One of my stints at Pfizer, this was back in the late 80s. What they did was, this is in the Connecticut side, in Groton, Connecticut. They had their main research site on one side and they had a plant site on the other where they did all this fermentation stuff like that. And they just had plant technicians. And there were a few years they brought over some of these technicians and trained them up in the lab. And these were high school, at the most, high school educated people. And I remember working with some of them. They were some of the most talented chemists that I've worked with, very skilled in certain things. Now, they don't have the deeper knowledge of like the theory of chemistry and various things that go along with that, but they operate in the lab very efficiently and with a lot of skill and experience. So, but today that's very uncommon if it exists at all. So yeah.
Well, and so an MCI graduate who decides not to go to college perhaps could look for training programs or apprenticeship type environments, and of course all this money coming into the economy around chip development, right, that the federal government is putting in, may be a really good place for people to go. So that's kind of a couple of different pathways for us to think about supporting our graduates with. Jess, definitely add to that. What do you think about what you've heard here? Is it interesting to you that this is kind of a changing landscape? Obviously, you know that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty common to hear. Obviously, I think even your Brad's emphasis on the you know, being proficient in the skills can be really important, even if the content's not quite there. Learning to work in a laboratory correctly and safely are important skills to also try to teach the students and get them prepared for as best as we can.
Brad, name something you learned at MCI that you use to this day in the laboratory. Is there anything?
Be safe.
Yeah, use a hood.
Yeah, use a hood, be safe. Wear a lab coat, wear goggles, safety glasses. That's a no-brainer.
There you
You're not
go.
allowed in the lab if you don't have safety glasses on.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Lydia, let's go back to you for a minute. Can you take us through a day in the life of what you do? Maybe tell us what your job is and kind of what you do and kind of what that looks like.
Sure, yeah. So my official title is a senior business analyst, but what I really do is I implement and manage the systems that are used by Dana-Farber, Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, Mass General Hospital, Boston Children's, and Brigham Women's to run their clinical trials. So 3 systems that I currently work on. One is an electronic regulatory binder. So it's a place for the study teams to hold and file electronically all of the regulatory documents surrounding like the IRB or the protocol or the consent, all within a system. Another system I work on is e-consent. So it's the ability to consent someone to a clinical trial electronically, right? And that helps really with the access to clinical trials. And then the other system I work on is the system that is used to actually submit the protocol to the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, that is required to review a trial and kind of give their stamp of approval before you can actually start, running this with actual patients. And so I'm more like, my overarching team is called Research Informatics of Operations. So we have the really unique role of working with all 5 of those hospitals that I mentioned and helping make the system that they all have to use work within their individual operations in a compliant way.
So you're not a scientist per se doing studies. You're interfacing between scientists and systems. You're doing a lot of communication, I bet. You're doing training. You're doing, hey, this is why this system does this. You're sort of troubleshooting and problem solving, right?
Yes, exactly. So I'm sort of that in-between person. So I work really closely with those that actually code the system and, like are writing the SQLs and, writing the code, and the actual users that are using them. And I actually started at Beth Israel as a clinical research coordinator. And so I was using the systems, but as a coordinator. And so I had, 10 clinical trials that were under me, and I had all the, the patients that were enrolled to those trials. So that was, that involved scheduling them according to the protocol, entering data, making sure that everything happened, according to the IRB approved protocol. And then I kind of switched over. So I have a unique perspective in that I was actually a user of the system, but now I get to help implement and manage and work with my team, that the other side of my team that does more of like the coding side.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that MCI graduates are often like this, where there's a lot of communication. We learned how to do Manson essays, like Pat said, and some conflict management. I bet there's a little bit of conflict between people using these systems at times. And
yes, there definitely is, because it's across 5 different hospitals, right? And so every group has a little bit of their own spin on how they actually operationalize like their systems. And so there's like, this might work for this hospital, but not for this hospital. So what can we do to really make it fit for both?
Yeah. And Brad, I'm going to go to you because, you said something in your last answer about you hire people. You're actually a people person as much as you're a laboratory person. You're doing stuff, you're managing people. Do you have to use some of those communication skills in your job, as technical as it is, as sort of deep science as it is?
Oh, absolutely. I frequently have Well, I'm involved with multiple projects here, one chemistry wise, but others, more like a consultant sort of thing. So we have meetings all the time. We have PowerPoint presentations, and you got to get your point across concisely. My boss has this thing on his desk called "Be quick, be smart, be gone." So that's how we try to operate. Like get to your point, be smart about it, and move on. So
Yeah.
yes.
Jess, I bet this is part of what you're doing in your world is helping kids sort of understand that multifaceted nature of science and the communication as a part of that.
Yeah, communication is big.
Yeah, Jess.
Yeah, I mean, communication's really important, whether they're working in groups or communicating their findings after they've done something, what worked well, what didn't, where were their errors, how can they make it better. We see that a lot, especially with the engineering classes that we've put in, um, and the whole like working on, building, failing, rebuilding. What did they change? Why did they change it? Did it make improvement? Where can they still improve? And communicating those verbally, written, multiple ways, and emphasizing that aspect of it.
Yeah, and
Thank
that's
goodness.
very good, Jess. That's
I was going to say, thank
that's
goodness we still have teachers like this at MCI, right? I mean,
yeah,
this is
that's actually really good. That's one of the things I struggle with my young engineers coming out of college is teaching them to, yeah, you did all this testing. Now you need to communicate it to, the rest of the people, in the organization. And that involves, clearly writing it and leading somebody through who's not as close to it as you are. So how do you lead somebody through and write that? And as technical people, we oftentimes stay with the technical and don't appreciate the need for being able to communicate and write. And those are very important skills for the students to learn early, like you're teaching them.
Pat, do you have any vignettes, any scenarios that you can recall in recent history of your management where somebody really failed at that? Now, obviously not names or anything, but something that kind of went down in flames because it was badly communicated.
Um, Not something necessarily very recent, but something very kind of engineering approach to people management where an engineer doesn't necessarily have people skills. As engineers, we're trying to always improve processes and make things happen faster and more efficiently. And sometimes when we're doing that, we're looking at computer-based tools and automation. When you start implementing those things into companies, then people start saying, you're going to take my job. You're going to replace me with a computer or automation. And I had a VP years ago, and we were implementing this advanced expert system. And he immediately came in and was introducing, and he's there, this is going to be great. We're going to be able to reduce our workforce. And it's like, you do not want to communicate like that. So he just didn't have that communication skill. And it was like torpedoed the whole program because everybody said, I'm not saying anything. You're not capturing anything that I do.
Yeah, as soon as the system's implemented, you guys all lose your jobs. Isn't that great?
Yeah. And so he lacked that vision of not getting rid of people, but how do you best use a person for what a person does and use a machine for what a machine does, right?
Yeah, Lydia, you're earlier in the workforce, I guess I could say it that way, than the rest of us. What are folks your age saying about this AI stuff and this elimination of jobs? What are you hearing about that? You're in the middle of a tech environment there. What are you hearing?
Yeah, so I feel like there's less concern from maybe our age group because I think everyone is really excited about the opportunities that it actually can do for us. Like one example is it can read radiology scans. And while, of course, we're not getting rid of radiologists, right? But if an AI can detect something that the human eye cannot, and then, the actual doctor can look at it and confirm and everything, then why wouldn't we want to go forward with that? And we just, our team, my specific team, is getting a little bit into the AI. We've seen it a little bit in terms of like the help desk, like submitting, tickets because something isn't working. We have like a ticketing system. And so now there's, a bot that takes this ticket and says, okay, this is the issue. It needs to be triaged over here. It needs to be triaged over here. And while so that's not a person anymore, that the person that was doing that can focus their time elsewhere, right? So I don't think it's seen as a replacement, but as an opening up some of these like more mundane tasks and letting you focus on some other things that a computer cannot.
Right.
Interesting. And Brad, I'm going to ask you the same question. At one point, I remember earlier in your career, you were worried about all the offshoring and outsourcing, and then now AI is coming along. I wonder what your thoughts are. Are you concerned about, the future of the science that you do as a result? And then after Brad answers this, I'd like to go out to the community here and see if anybody has questions. So Tom, if you can look for anybody, if you could raise your hand, Tom will queue you up for a question here, and we'll see if anybody, we'll get a little bit interactive here with folks if we can. Brad, what are your thoughts about that? This next generation of so-called getting rid of people's jobs.
For what I do, it's probably going to be a powerful tool to help, which has already kind of been borne out by there are companies built around AI doing drug discovery. I can see maybe certain things like what Lydia was saying, more of the mundane sort of task could be maybe taken care of by AI. But in terms of doing drug discovery, there's a company called in silico where they use AI and they bring in all this data from that's known out there in the public domain, and they're able to look at AI is used, to see patterns and like proteins and how drugs fit into proteins and that sort of thing. And they've been able to harness that technology in order to speed up the drug discovery process.
Right.
There's this other company called AlphaFold. I don't know if you've heard of it. They are big into AI, and they try to predict how proteins fold, which is the key component on how everything works in your body. It's about all these proteins folding. And they can predict on how some of these proteins will fold, and then they can, do like this virtual drug screening, these compound screens by having structures on a computer, and they can just see how it fits. They can model it into the protein in certain areas where it might fit. And they can, use the computers to do this at a much faster pace than that we can do it as humans. I think once quantum computing becomes optimized, then it's going to be a whole new game. Yeah.
That's another whole piece of this, right? The quantum computing is sort of a almost infinite processing power that's coming.
But AI is certainly, I know a lot of the bigger companies are investing in it heavily. We're kind of touching upon it. We're just a really small company, but Pfizer's definitely doing it. Merck, Bristol Myers, Eli Lilly, all the big companies I know they're doing it, or they're collaborating with someone who is doing it. So it's big.
Tom, have we got anybody queued up for a question, or does anybody want to put their hand up and ask a question of the panel?
I haven't seen anyone with their hand up, but I certainly can give everyone
David
access.
Pearson, our head of school, who's been with us about a year and a half now, has a question. Thank you, David. You're rescuing me. Thank you. Whoops, you're on mute. Rookie mistake.
There you go. That's my job, Mike. Yeah. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Jess and Brad and Patrick and Lydia for doing this. And Mike, I always enjoy your bonhomie approach. And it's just marvelous. And it's just so refreshing to see this new format being trialed and experimented with. I mean, technology is such a fabulous exoskeleton in its own right. And that we have 273 Taiwanese students learning synchronously online as part of our student body with 16 schools in Taiwan. So I'm completely fascinated by what I'm hearing about technology and education and science and the background that propelled you to where you are today. And as we think about curriculum and teaching, and you've already mentioned AI, and we have a presentation from a faculty member tomorrow afternoon about AI and teaching here at MCI, I would be interested, is there things that you think must be in a high school curriculum today that, whether it's traditional or innovative, that is going to help students in perhaps more powerful ways than some of our traditional offerings? And again, it's a very wide open question, but the world is changing so quickly, and trying to be adept and flexible and react to these environmental changes is a constant battle. What do you see, and what need is there that we may not be fulfilling as a nation or even as a school today? Thank you.
Pat, you want to have a first pass at that?
Yeah, I'll have a go at it. And I think actually MCI might be doing it, but not necessarily realizing they're doing it. One of the more important things when all of these companies work and develop product or systems is managing the process, and understanding what the process is. And that involves a lot of communication across different stakeholders. And so it's really important for students to learn the importance of that communication to different organizations within an entity or different stakeholders within a process, and how that process is executed to deliver a product. Like, we're all in industries where it's got some sort of regulation because we're dealing with people related products and you don't want to harm the end customer. Like, we're involved with safety in what I do. So I get involved with the FAA. We can't put something in the air, so I have to be able to communicate that. And there's a process by which you certify something to go in the world. I'm sure, Brad, there's strict to use. So I think that ability to communicate process and communicate across the boundaries is very important from an educational standpoint.
Interesting. And I would suggest that our multi-ethnic, multinational, multi-age, school, which we all went to as well, sets the test bed for that, right? It sets the conditions for that kind of cross communication.
Right. That's why I say they don't know they're doing it.
Yeah. Well, it's
Yeah.
part of the deal, right? It's part of the deal. I won't expound. I'll go to Brad because you used his name in vain. Brad, what are your thoughts? Do you see it that same way, or do you think there are more, other skills that to David's question that ought to be learned at MCI?
I always think communication is big on. We touched upon that, earlier. I don't know what that looks like in a way. I mean, do people have debate classes or something and learn how to critically think, on your feet, debating someone? I mean, we have people going back and forth all the time here debating, well, this is what happened. No, this is what happened. This is what this data shows us. No, this is what this data shows us. That sort of thing. Other than the traditional sciences, chemistry, the rules of chemistry are the same. They haven't changed. I mean, there's new ways of doing things, but you make a chemical bond the same way we make a chemical bond. The science is still there. In terms of maybe AI or data, I don't know if there's like a data science, like early data science sort of things. I mean, that's a big data is big.
Yeah.
Really.
I'm gonna go over to Lydia because she's in that exact space with information. And I asked her the other day, are you a mathematician? Do you do regression? Do you know Z-scores and all that stuff? And she said, I kind of know what it is, but that's actually the right answer, right? And Lydia, maybe you can expand on that a little bit. I mean, this idea of data being a valuable part of the communication process, right, is a thing.
Absolutely, because you have to know how to read the data, how to interpret the data, and then how to actually share that data to users who may not have that same background. And so you can't move forward with the process, right? If your stakeholders, you don't have buy-in, right? If they don't understand. And data is what is used to drive processes forward. Like, we don't make a change to something unless we have data to back it up. And so learning how to read and interpret it. And then also, I was going to suggest, and a class like this might already exist, but even something as simple as how to create a PowerPoint effectively. And, we have so many important meetings with top level stakeholders where you have 10 minutes to get your point across and to get something approved. And so learning how to actually put a PowerPoint together that is going to effectively communicate what you need to in a short amount of time. And then my other suggestion was like a change management course, because things are rapidly evolving, right? And so a lot of what I do is change management. We have this old system, right? We're going to introduce a new system, or we're going to change it to be more effective and more efficient this way. But these 4,000 users are used to doing it, this way for X amount of time. And so how do we actually communicate and convince them that we need to change, right? You do that with data. You do that with effective communication. You do that with effective PowerPoint presentations, and help work with everyone to actually change the way you need to. So I would find a change management course to be very useful in the work.
That's interesting. And I want to go to Jess here on the delivery of this in the classroom, what that's kind of evolving to look like. 'Cause she's a good communicator. In fact, did a lot of that in our strategic planning and was able to represent her own opinion and that of others very effectively. So I think she's embodying what you guys are describing. But Lydia, I'm interested in this because your background and your orientation, it's put you in the middle of this organization that's a lot of big brains, people with like PhDs and double PhDs, and they're all from Harvard, and they're all the smartest people in the world, and they're solving world hunger and cancer and everything else. How do you stand up in a meeting to that? I mean, I'm not saying you're not a big brain. I'm not saying you can't do all that. You may not be there yet. How do you handle that?
Yeah, well, I think I have to say, I don't do anything myself, right? Part of that is having great coworkers and having a great relationship with your coworkers. And then just building confidence, right? So you have to go into these meetings with confidence, and you have to know, but then also it is always okay if you don't know the answer. All you have to do is say, that is a great question. I will get back to you. And so that is one thing that we've taken a lot, in that I don't want to say lie, but don't make it up. Just say, that's a great question. I don't know. And so I think being able to knowing what you know and what you don't know, but how to find the answer, I think is important and to help make you successful.
Confidence, bounded with some humility, followed up with some diligence. Sounds like a good formula.
Yes.
And Jess, what about this idea of communication? Like I said, you're a good communicator. Are you, explicitly, and our other teachers at MCI explicitly, focused on this part of the science education at MCI and other areas? How to do a PowerPoint, that whole thing.
Oh, I mean, I think a lot of us try to integrate it in some way and do various projects or presentations with the students, or have them do that. I know off of the task force, we've been working on actually writing out the pathways that we're going to be looking into. We've spent a lot of time this year kind of mapping those out and what classes those would require, and a lot of the things that have come up kind of go around those. So for instance, the School of Engineering and then the business and marketing pathway both kind of said, okay, we have a project management class, but we want to fine tune the curriculum so it does focus a little bit more on presentation and communication, and kind of what Lydia was saying, like changing communication and changing management type of stuff. So we have talked about that. We're going to revamp that curriculum that already exists. We've talked a lot of, we have a data science class that would be a requirement of both of those, as well as the health pathway that we're looking to implement. We've identified some other classes that we don't currently have that we think, if we're going to make this launch, we're going to make it work, we need to put in place. One of them is just an introductory computer class for someone who might not be at the level of web design or cybersecurity, but using kind of more basic level PowerPoints, whatever those might be, videos, other tools to help present their materials and findings in appropriate ways. So I think, you know, we're working within our classes individually, but even at a larger scale of the school, of identifying like these are the skills, these are the things that kids going into these areas, and not all of them are, you know, health science and all of that. We're, you know, the same idea with someone going into the industry and trade, communication skills that they're going to need at a different level. But making sure that those classes exist here, or we at least have the resources that we can bring in to give them the exposure that they need to get them that foundation to be at a level that they're going to be successful at when they leave.
Thanks for making that connection for us. I think that's really why we're all here today, is to try to make connections for students who are there. Do we have any students online or anybody that has any other questions? Is there anybody that would like to ask a question of this panel who is a current student at MCI? Crickets. Bueller.
No more, I've
That's
got no more
okay.
raised hands there, Mike. No more there's no more raised hands, so.
Okay, very good. But so here's the thing that I'm going to ask you guys, and I'm going to make you squirm a little bit. I'm not going to ask you what you make for salaries. I'm not going to do that. But I spent a lot of time in Asia, and oftentimes you get in a taxi in China in particular, and the first thing they say is, "Oh, you're an American. How much money? How much do you make a year?" I used to get that question a lot, and I used to get into it because I was really interested in what was going on with the economy. Could you guys give me sort of a sense for, in your field, what an entry-level person tends to make, and describe what that position is? Because I think this is useful information for folks from Pittsfield and Burnham and Detroit who are on this call, maybe students, maybe parents. I'm just curious what you're seeing, and you're all in metropolitan areas. You're in edge cities or directly in cities where the economy of this country is quite different from the rural economy. It's not better or worse, but I'm just curious if you could share with us a little bit. And Brad, I'll put you on the spot first. What is an entry-level scientist? I mean, you do hiring, so you kind of know these numbers. What does it look like there? And who is that person from a qualification standpoint?
So a bachelor's level person with, say, right out of school. We have one here that just has a few months at Pfizer, right up Pfizer Boulder, but got downsized, for lack of a better term, pretty immediately. Generally it's, I don't know, like 80,000 a year to start. That's with very little experience. And of course, if you have more experience, it's a higher level. Entry level PhDs are anywhere. Now, again, it depends on where you live, but say in the San Francisco area, even here, Boulder's kind of expensive, Boston area. Anywhere from 115 to 130 to start. And if you have a
They've been in
PhD,
school for 8 years.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
30
usually
years
a
old by
grad
now.
PhD student is 4 to 5 years, sometimes 6, and then some people do a postdoc, and then when you have a postdoc, it adds a little more. And usually we have, within our company, we have like a scientific ladder and a management ladder, and they try to keep it similar. They might have different names for the same level, so they try to keep it similar. But that kind of gives you a ballpark of where starting out salaries are. It's a good field. I think it's paid well. We're competitive. We have to be, because everyone wants these people. Especially if you're very talented. We have to be competitive, and not only the salary, but all the benefits that go with it. So
Yeah,
sure. Lydia, how about in your world? You're maybe in a different spot in that organization, but I'm just curious if you could describe what you think an entry-level person would come in there. And that would be different for a doctor than it would be for another person.
Yeah.
So describe that person maybe.
Yeah. So in the clinical research space, oftentimes, like, what you are hired into right out of college is like a CR, like a clinical research coordinator. And so, like on my specific team, you have to have had work experience outside of college before joining. So an actual entry level in the clinical research space, I would say, is probably on what might be considered the lower end, 40 to 50,000 probably. in my team where you've had to have a couple years of experience doing some type of work, it's probably closer to the 60 to 75,000. But we work for nonprofit institutions, so it is a little bit of a different space than a drug company, or it's just
Sure.
it's a different space.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. Pat, what about your world? And also, do you have any visibility to those CNC folks and some of the other folks that you were describing earlier? With that, maybe you could give us a couple of price points if you know. And again, I'm not trying to be annoying here. This is actually becoming a thing that the state of New York, state of California, Colorado, even
Yeah.
now, they have to publish these salaries anyway. So I'm not
Mhm.
really pushing anybody's buttons, I don't think, in the modern economy. Let me know if I am, but I'm just trying to get some information back to folks that are listening here today.
Yeah, no, you're not pushing any buttons, Mike. And actually, there are some professional organizations, they do some surveys and kind of collect ranges of salaries for various job positions and educational backgrounds. I don't do any hiring of people, but the last time I was involved with some hiring years ago, now we're probably paying for bachelor's entries 55 to 75 for a bachelor's entry. We at my site do not hire many doctors. Typically when people get into the business, then the company is very good about educational funding if for advanced degrees and stuff like that. So, I mean, they're really good. A lot of people, even some of our technicians who come in with just high school degrees, end up getting college degrees afterwards because the company pays for them to go. And we all know college is getting more and more and more and more expensive. I am floored how much colleges cost compared to what I did when the dinosaurs roamed the earth.
Well, that it's an excellent point. Is that being a bit strategic about how a young person funds themselves, getting to these places where all of you have reached already in your careers, and to get there, you got to find some ladders, and some of it's financial ladders, and these bigger organizations, these bigger companies, from what you're describing, and I've seen this myself. Even if you get in before you get into college, that's a good way to get college funded sometimes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and it's a good way to find out what you like. I mean, coming out of high school, I think all of us, maybe Lydia, maybe you wound around a little, but I know coming out of high school, I kind of went right into aerospace, and I'm still in aerospace, but that's not the norm. And so going into a business and working as an intern or something opens up people's ideas and young people's ideas as to what a specific job is. Years ago, I was a big brother at one of the high schools, and they thought as an aerospace engineer, I made planes all day, paper planes all day, and flew them around. So it was always interesting to show them what actually happens in these large aerospace manufacturing companies. We do the engineering and design, we do the testing, and then we have entire manufacturing facilities that use all this advanced machinery and stuff like that. And that's all stuff that needs to get learned somewhere. And and sometimes they don't know that until they get in and start understanding it and see it, and then they can make lights come on.
I'm probably more like Lydia, the way you describe it, Pat, and that I had no idea. I mean, I studied Chinese, right, when I went to college. So
Yeah.
God knows what happened with that. Jess, what are you hearing from students? Since we don't have any students jumping on here to jump in and give us their voice directly, what are you hearing? What are you seeing with MCI students today on this idea of careers and next steps? Or is any of this conversation, do you think, the kind of things that they'd like to hear more of, or be helpful to them?
Yeah, I think so. I know I teach a lot of juniors and seniors, um, especially like AP Bio and Anatomy. And one thing I would mention that I have seen more in the last couple years that I think is a newer trend. Right now, where Maine is offering free community college for students when they graduate. There's a number of even my high achieving students that are reassessing their career goals at the short term and long term. And I have a number of students right now in like my sorry, my AP Bio class, who, you know, their end goal is to be a nurse practitioner or a doctor. And they're actually going to be starting, or they're currently taking courses through community college for free, so that they can go right into the nursing program, get that taken care of, start working, and then go back to school. Hopefully the hospital that they're working at will pay for some of it for them to get their undergrad bachelor's and then move on to get a master's in the field that they're looking at. So I think that, you know, what Maine is offering currently from high schools being able to like have kids enrolled in classes currently while they're in high school, and, you know, like they can leave with 15 credits already in place. And then the free community college for those students is opening a lot of doors, and putting them in a place where they won't be as hard up financially and can pursue a more advanced degree later on, without that financial burden, which I think is a great thing for all of our students to kind of embrace and see what new path that might make for them. And I think a lot of them are open to that, which is exciting to see. And I think financially responsible of them at such a young age, even. Another, you know, I have an advisor who his goal is, he wants to go for plumbing. And we had a conversation the other day. So he's going to, I think, KVCC, or he might be going to Maine Community College for a certificate in plumbing. But then we discussed, okay, well, do you ever want to open your own business, maybe work for yourself? So while you're there, why not take a couple business classes? You can take them for free, and get that associates or even just the exposure under your belt without having to pay for it later on. So I think there's some really cool opportunities for students moving forward with that piece that's new and not something we've really seen for our students before.
Well, that's exciting. I mean, I think back on my own experience. I wish I had learned to do more with my hands. You know, like I would love to have learned how to do some electrical work, you know, that I've had to sort of figure out or pay somebody else to do all these years. So you know, it's interesting what you're describing. I'll just stop for a second and see if there are any other questions from the audience. Any other thoughts or ideas or questions for the panelists? I've got a couple of last things to talk about, but happy to see if there's any other questions.
Again, using that feature of raising your hand at the bottom, folks, if you have a question, I'll let Mike know and he can give you a call.
And I got to believe, Greg, you've got a question. Come on. We gotta get him unmuted. I guess maybe that's the problem.
He's been talking all along.
I'm seeing no hands up, Mike.
Jess, I'm glad you're teaching people PowerPoint. They never taught me PowerPoint when I was in high school. Wasn't around.
So I'd like to, you know, I'd like to wrap with kind of a final question for each of you. It's a little different, which is the non-scientific part of your lives at MCI and growing up in Maine and growing up in Pittsfield. What aspect of being a teenager and graduating from MCI did sort of the other stuff really matter? The having fun part, the doing a sport part, the doing music part. You know, what do you remember and what was important to you? Pat, you mentioned Manson essays, but I bet there were some others. Maybe start with you, Pat. Is there anything else that you did at MCI that was worth it? I sometimes worry that there's a lot of seriousness in the world, and I love seeing when I'm on campus at MCI. I love seeing the students laughing and joking and having fun, and I worry that there's a lot of seriousness in the world, and I wonder if you think having fun is a big part of being in high school.
I do, and in particular with MCI, and some of you who are out in California and even maybe Colorado, but out in here in Arizona, I see the big high schools, and they're like several thousand students, but they're closed campuses. I see them more as the students go there. I don't see them happy. I'm sure there's some form of happy in there, but I don't see it because it's all closed and it's very restricted. MCI was very open, that open campus when the bells are ringing and everybody's moving between, you're chatting with people. And I think it's just that open environment and that encouragement to try something like sports. You know, if you were good at good in a academic classroom, you weren't looked down upon because you wanted to play a sport. You know, you could do it all. And I like that environment that MCI promoted, and I believe it still promotes highly. And that allows you to go out from that community and see anything's possible, you know, and you stay connected. You know, to this day, you know, I played sports at MCI. I enjoyed going outdoors in the Maine woods and stuff like that. To this day, you know, I cross the Grand Canyon, you know, I mountain bike 3, 4 times a week. It's like I get outside. I love my work, what I do. I love dealing with the engineering, but I like the outside too. So you kind of get a lot of cross pollination.
Lydia, what do you think? You graduated later than the rest of us. And I'm not painting any generation with any brushes, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are about this fun piece.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many fond memories of MCI. You know, we're in a carnival and homecoming, and you know, being involved in student council and in band and sports. And the other thing I want to that MCI offers, right, is you know, the dorm kids. Like, we were a host family to someone who's still one of my very best friends who lives in Mexico, and I've been to Mexico a few times to visit her. And so having that exposure and that experience, I think just really, you know, when I went to college, I was like, oh, I'm already used to walking in between classes or having the responsibility of, you know, I get to leave campus for lunch, and or, you know, you see all these different, you know, getting to be friends with all these different people. I mean, I loved that part about MCI.
Well, Charles Jeffers, who I named in vain earlier, the Bermudian guy that went to high school with us, I haven't seen him in 40 years. He literally hadn't been on campus in 40 years. And we were laughing. There were a handful of us. I haven't been laughing that hard in years about stuff that happened in 1982. It's fairly crazy, but you're right about that kind of cross-cultural, cross-perspective, you know, way of seeing things. And his perspective as a minority in Pittsfield was really different than ours, and he had some really great observations that were funny and fun and educational, frankly. Brad, how about you? I know you didn't have any fun while you were there. What
Oh, absolutely not. Well, as you know, the new houses and even my mom's side go way back at the MCI legacy thing. So I had big shoes to fill, but I was very involved, as you know. You and I played basketball together and baseball, and you did soccer, I did football. And the group of friends that we had is very special. I've known Mike since nursery school, and a lot of the friends, you know, pretty much we grew up together, and we still get together, and we're going to get together next month. So that is, to me, that is really special. But the small town thing, my wife we've talked about this. And you know, what is it about Pittsfield? And you know, and it could be challenging on staying busy and that sort of thing. But if you're involved, it's not challenging at all. I mean, I had a lot of fun with the athletics and the extracurriculars, and you know, and just being around the group of friends. And you know, I was pushed by you guys. I think we all pushed each other, academically, athletically, and just, you know, being good people. And that's a really special thing. And just to grow up where we grew up, you know, small town, rural Maine. It was nice. You know, it was really good. I felt like I had a good upbringing there. You know my parents really well, and we all knew you know, everyone's parents kind of like were second, third parents to each other. You know, so we just had that network. It was quite special.
Well, and Jess, we were talking about it before we started the session, how you're coaching, and I know you live in the community, and you know, you're living that life, and you're a leader in that world. So thank you. And you can hear the connection to MCI going back to these generations. You know, I think we'll wrap here. Do you have any final words for us? Any thoughts about this session that we've gone through today? I hope you've enjoyed yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's been great. I think, all of you talked about, going to MCI and graduating there and everything that has, given you um, and what you enjoyed about it. But I might not have graduated there, but I've, been there since I was 22 years old. And I see a lot of those things through my students, but also through myself. I mean, I enjoy my job. I enjoy working with the students. I have fun every single day, teaching the kids and building relationships with them. And, MCI and Pittsfield are without a doubt, my community, and my kids are living it. Even though they're 7 and 9, they can't wait to be Huskies, and everybody on campus knows who they are. And um, it's pretty amazing, and a great community to be a part of.
Well, and I'll offer on their behalf as we wrap up here that also as a conduit between students and sort of the real world out there, I'm sure these folks would be glad to take a call or talk to a student or visit with somebody who was interested in one of these areas or just wanted some advice. So I'm going to offer that for the three of you. And on that note, we'll close the meeting. And thank you so much for your time tonight. I know you're all busy. You've all got lives. And it's so exciting to have you sharing your wisdom and your experience with us. And please come back to Reunion and come back on campus anytime. Mr. Pearson, Jess, anybody will give you a tour. If you haven't seen the new Founders Hall, get up in there and particularly get up in the bell tower and look at the bell. Well, I'll leave it at that. Tom, is there any parting words for us?
Well, yeah, I popped on purpose, Mike. This has been great, and participation here. If you don't know all who are on, if you click on the participants tab at the bottom, you can see who is here. We'll work out some kinks, but hopefully, as we go forward through the rest of the STEAM and expand beyond that, we grow this thing. So thank you all as panelists, as David said and as Mike has said, and I think I'd be remiss not to say that this is Mike's idea. This was something Mike felt very passionate about getting going, and doing so for the reason of providing an opportunity for our students to really see what's out there as an opportunity for them. So as we continue forward, please encourage others to participate as panelists, and please come back and watch us as participants as we go forward. So thank you again, and thank you to Mike for leading the discussion tonight.
This is a very good idea, folks.
Well, we're going to keep doing it. This is the first one, and thanks for being the inaugural class here. So come and watch the other ones, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
All right, everybody take care and be safe.
Take care.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.